Good afternoon. My name is Shubho Prasad Chandna, and I will be teaching you about commodity fetishism. To understand about Marx's concept of commodity fetishism, we need to first understand the concepts of commodity and fetishism. Commodity is an economic concept. Fetishism, Marx borrowed from social anthropology of his time. So, what's a commodity? A commodity, in very simple terms, is a thing that is produced for consumption by someone else, which it means it is implied sale in the marketplace. So you go out, go to a shop, you go on Amazon, all the things you see there, in fact, all the things that you now own were or are commodities, given that they once were on the marketplace or will be or are now. Now, here's the thing that you have to understand, that all commodities are things, objects, but not all objects are commodities. The way that this works is like this Venn diagram that I have niftily drawn for you. Commodities are a subset of things. So what are the things or objects that are not commodities? One of the things that Marx mentions: virgin soil, fruit of the forests that you collect yourself, perhaps a chair that you make for your own self and not for selling it on the marketplace. What is common among things that are objects and things that are commodities? Use value. This is one of the crucial innovations of Marx's labor theory of value. He distinguishes between use value and exchange value, which is something that the economist that Marx is trying to counter, Adam Smith, did not distinguish. So when Adam Smith conceptualized the wealth of nations, he thought that the market was moved by an invisible hand that arose naturally from the pressures of supply and demand, and in any sort of trade or exchange that is happening, one party is offering the utility of their commodity in exchange for another utility of another commodity. So that's where you get the myth of the barter system, a coincidence of wants. I have a bushel of rice, you have a pair of shoes. I am walking bare feet, you are walking hungry. What do? We say, give me your shoes and I will give you some rice. So in this case, I am exchanging the utility. That's how Smith theorizes it. The rice is useful to you, the shoes are useful to me. I need one, you need one, we make the exchange. We are exchanging utilities. But therefore, I'll get back to this point later, but most objects have utility. But this is the thing you need to understand, not all objects have use value, because use value only appears if you use something or if you find a use for something. There are things for which there is no use. So use value is in fact a socially produced value, thing, facet of an object. It is not something that inheres in the object. Opposed to use value, we have exchange value. What's exchange value? Exchange value is the value that you sell an object for or you buy an object for in the marketplace. Now, when you are thinking of it, you are thinking of it in terms of price. But Marx goes much farther back than that. How far back does he go? He goes again to the barter system that Smith theorized or hypothesized. And in this barter system, the example that he gives is 10 yards of linen being exchanged for a coat. A coat has different use value from 10 yards of linen. You can take 10 yards of linen and turn that into a bed sheet. You can take 10 yards of linen and wrap it around you. You can take 10 yards of linen and make it into a coat with your own tailoring capabilities. A coat is different. A coat is useful in that it keeps you warm. A coat is useful in that it is fashionable. So these are distinct use values. One of the questions that Marx asks is, if use values are distinct, how can they be comparable? If two things serve completely different functions, clearly there is no way to exchange them on the basis of those functions that they serve. Therefore, the solution that he proposes to this is the exchange value. The exchange value, first off, is comparable. When you are exchanging 10 yards of linen for one coat, you are in fact comparing them together, and the way you're comparing them is through the exchange value. You say the exchange the 10 yards of linen is worth one coat. But here's the rub. A commodity's exchange value, therefore, since it is distinct from use value, is not produced through human satisfaction. It appears only when a commodity is being sold at the marketplace. The marketplace creates the use value. Therefore, it is conventional. It is standardized. And two things can have the same use value but different exchange values. If I craft with my skill a very delicate and beautifully embroidered chair, and you, being a UG1 student or UG3 student, are unable to make as good of a chair because you have worse carpentry skills than me, your chair and my chair would have the same use value. But because my chair is better, as of course it is, it will cost more on the marketplace. It will have a higher exchange value. You would need multiple of your chairs to exchange for my beautiful chair. So yeah, use value is conventional and standardized. Sorry, exchange value is conventional and standardized because it is only relevant in the marketplace, and it is also not related to human use. But then here's the problem with that. Then where is the exchange value coming from? If it is not in the object itself, if it only arises when the object is in the marketplace and therefore socially produced, but it also does not come from people using the object. It does not come from the people who are using the object. It does not come from the object itself. Where is it coming from? That's when Marx comes in. That is where he says it comes from the socially necessary labor time required to produce that object. In any society, there are producers and there are consumers. So the way Marx begins saying is that he says it's the labor time. But the problem with saying labor time is the amount of time necessary for workmen to make something. But what does he mean by socially or societally necessary labor time? So the problem with the original labor time definition is that if a lazy workman or a lazy laborer takes more time to make the same chair, you would think that that chair would cost more, but it's not. It doesn't, or it shouldn't. That's why he throws on the societally necessary tag there, because he wants to say that it is the minimum amount of time, not the minimum, but a reasonable amount of time that the current amount of technicity in production allows for labor to produce that object or to produce that commodity. How is labor time theorized here? So labor is the underlying common denominator across all commodities. Here, Marx points out something. We have already found out that a commodity has a dual character, a use value and an exchange value. He says, Marx, that these two correspond to a dual character in labor, or so he implies. He says explicitly that labor has a dual character. One is labor, which is the specific sort of labor, the skill, so to say, that goes into producing a commodity. A tailor and a weaver have different sorts of skill sets. And you cannot really, the way you cannot compare the utility, i.e. use value, of a coat to the utility of 10 yards of linen, you cannot compare the labor that, or the skill that is expended by the tailor to the kind of skill expended and used by the labor and skill expended by the weaver. What do you have in common between the two? What you have in common between the two is the amount of time that they spent making their thing. And the more time that is necessary, Marx briefly digresses into the skill level. So why should a doctor's labor be more expensive than a tailor's labor? He briefly goes into the digression, but then he says that to simplify, he's simply taking average labor. So what he says that exchange value, the value for which a commodity is sold or bought at a marketplace, is congealed labor time, congealed socially necessary labor time. And this leads us to our understanding of our first equation, which Marx doesn't state but is also clearly implied, that a commodity is a use value and an exchange value, and the exchange value is formed of labor. Now, from here, we can progress into slightly more complicated stuff, which is the notion of the equivalent. I promise you, all of this is really necessary to understand how commodity fetishism works, because commodity fetishism arises out of being unable to perceive labor and labor time when looking at the finished product or the object. That is and which is why it appears as if commodities have that sort of invisible hand, and the market has the invisible hand, that products have a life of their own, and commodities have a life of their own, and they navigate their own ways through the market. When in fact, when we are giving money or gold for a chair, we are exchanging labor for labor in a certain sense. Anyway, so equivalent. Marx takes us through the same 4 stages of exchange that Smith takes us through, beginning with barter, which he calls the accidental value. So the accidental value is when I have a coat and you have 10 yards of linen, and you happen to need a coat and I happen to need 10 yards of linen, and there is that coincidence of wants. But even in this case, what Marx says is happening is not that we are exchanging utilities or use values, but that the use value of one object expresses the exchange value of the other. So the exchange value of the coat is mirrored in the use value of the 10 yards of linen. Why? Because I, as a weaver, do not need 10 yards of linen. I need the coat. Therefore, the 10 yards of linen has only exchange value for me. It has no use value. I am giving away, I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm actually not sacrificing a utility. Similarly, for you as a tailor, you do not need the coat. You can just keep making more coats. So the coat has no use for you. It has, again, zero use value for you. It has use value for me. So I get use value and you give away exchange value. That is what he means, that the use value of one object is expressed by the exchange value of the other. It's a